What's up, everybody? It's Jairo from the Grind Fitness Training Systems, and welcome to another topic. Today, we're going to talk about muscle architecture for combat athletes. What does that mean? Basically, what that means is how you're kind of built. So there's a genetic factor of the type of muscle tissues you have and how you're actually genetically prone to a particular type of muscle tissue, but as well as how you can amplify what you actually have. When it comes to like the genetic aspect, there's certain people that are built with particular like fast twitch muscles compared to slow twitch muscles and vice versa. It's kind of like the idea of like, do you pick the sport or does the sport pick you? So you can amplify how a little bit of how you're built, but at the end of the day, there is a genetic component that you can't overcome genetics. In the fight game, you'll see a lot of the African MMA fighters that are now coming in, like Ngannou and stuff like that. There are a lot of fast twitch muscles. They're just built that way, which is amazing for them for combat athletes. It makes for them to have a lot of reflexes, be able to kind of do a lot of explosive and powerful movement. So what I'm going to show you is how we can amplify what you're just genetically gifted. So first things first, what is muscle architecture? It's not how big the muscle is, it's how they're built. Okay, so it kind of reinforces exactly what I just finished saying. So structure determines function. So how you're built and how you're built and the size of the building basically there determines how much function there is or how it actually functions when you're actually doing your combat sport. So there's a couple key components. There's three major things when it comes to muscle architecture. So the first one is pronation angle. I actually had to Google this because I didn't actually know what this meant. So it's the angle between the muscle fibers and the axis of force generated. Basically, what that means is the more fibers equals more force. It's pretty easy to kind of explain. So in other words, if you're able to up muscle tissue, you're able to generate more force. That's pretty easy to do. Then there's fiber length. The longer the fiber, the faster and more dynamic you have when you move. So long fibers equals more dynamic movement, more endurance, things of that nature. This is why people like the Diaz brothers, Nate and Nick Diaz, is the example I can think of off the top of my head. They were like triathlon competitors and stuff like that. So they had long fibers. So they never got tired. So their fight style was just wear you out, and then eventually round 3, round 4, round 5, they're gonna start to capitalize because they have that endurance in their muscle tissue. And then the last one is tendon elasticity. Basically, you're storing energy and releasing it, so you're generating force like a spring. This is the one where people run into issues because they think that muscle and tendon are the same thing, and they're not. I mean, to some degree, they're basically the same tissue, just with some slight changes to it. But tendon it's a much harder, more denser tissue that it takes a longer time frame in order for you to build strength with that. So where you see where people kind of skip that step sometimes is where a good example is like bodybuilders, especially if they're taking PEDs, performance enhancing drugs like steroids. They're trying to get as much muscle tissue as possible. And what ends up happening is that they get their muscle tissue big, but their tendon strength isn't matching the amount of muscle tissue that they have. And then they accidentally rip a pec, rip a bicep, rip a quad. I've seen pec, bicep, and quad, all from bodybuilders basically taking steroids, and their muscle tissue was actually stronger than their tendon strength. So tendon elasticity is actually very, very important when it comes to muscle architecture. So how does it impact you, the combat athlete? So how does it affect your combat performance? The first one is striking. So striking is a combination of pronation, which is what we just talked about, and elastic recoil. That combination is what generates knockout power. So again, I go back to a lot of the African fighters that have been coming into the UFC recently. That's how they're built genetically. They have a lot of muscle tissue, and they have amazing elastic recoil with that muscle tissue, which allows them to generate a lot of knockout power. So you're built like that, great, but not everybody's built like that. So one of the things I'm going to go through in a minute is I'm going to teach you exactly how you need to train in order for you to amplify whatever genetics you have. Now for grappling, it's a little different. Grappling is more about endurance training. So it's fiber length, which allows extended leverage and quick transitions. Basically what that means is you're able to isometrically hold longer. Your muscle tissue is able to, your muscle actually has endurance. It's not just how much cardio output that you have. It's also how much work can the muscle tissue sustain. And that goes down to like type of muscle tissue, how it's able to get rid of any waste product from its actual work that's happening when you're grappling. So there's things you can do with that as well. And then the last one is straight up endurance, where your efficient tendons reduces fatigue over time. So again, I go back to the example that I was telling you about the Diaz brothers, is they just wore you down. A lot of the grapplers from Kazakhstan and all that do the same thing. Is their endurance is so high that they just wear the fighter out. So how do you train the muscle architecture? The first one is hypertrophy. Hypertrophy basically means get bigger muscles. It increases the pronation angles. Eccentric training. A lot of people don't do this. So I don't know if one of the other videos I talked about tempo. I know I've written a blog about this. Tempo training is that you can change how you actually tempo train when you lift. So if you're lifting, you're focusing on the eccentric motion of that lift. You can do it 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 8 seconds, 10 seconds. You have to pick that. You have to figure out what that math is for you. What that does is it creates longer fibers. So a good example for this is that you run into this a lot where people will say, I have tight hamstrings. Not really. It's basically you're not able to do what's called eccentric loading. So your hamstrings are not strong in the eccentric portion of the muscle tissue, which causes shortened fibers. So if you're able to increase the eccentric training, you're able to increase the length of the fibers. And then the last one is plyometrics and ballistic work, increased tendon elasticity. That's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, if you do a lot of plyometrics and a lot of ballistic work, you're going to increase the total tendon strength, which who doesn't want that? It just reduces your risk of accidentally getting injured. Now, this is something that a lot of us miss, including myself. And again, I've said it many, many times. Recovery is super, super important. And this is a facet that you also need to pepper into your training, either before you lift or after you lift. So it's fascia and movement quality. So your fascia, which is the connective tissue around your muscle tissue. Within each muscle fiber, there's fascia wrapped around it. And there's like layers of fascia. So the fascia actually affects the force transfer, which again is important because the higher force output you have, the more you can dominate a fight, or the more you can dominate a match, the more you can dominate the situation. So understanding that you got to do myofascial release, things like foam rolling, lacrosse ball, pressure point, things like that is going to increase the fascia release, which will increase the overall force output, which who doesn't want that? Okay. And then as well as loaded stretching to improve the architecture. So that's things like sitting into a deep squat with a kettlebell in your hands. You're just doing it loaded. So you're not just sitting in that squat, but you're sitting with additional load on top of you. So that peppering that type of work inside your workouts is going to give you the maximum benefits for your muscle architecture. Now, programming tips. So here's the problem that I found with a lot of combat sports, especially grappling. You have to create a season for yourself because you cannot be optimal all the time. It's impossible. Nobody's able to do that. So if you're an active competitor when it comes to grappling, you have to give yourself seasons, pre-season, in-season, off-season. If you don't do that, you're not going to be able to create what's called a macro cycle for your programming. And if you're not able to create a macro cycle for your programming, what you're going to do is you're going to be constantly overtraining or undertraining. So the goal here is you got to figure out your timeline, depending on what your timeline is, and you need to figure out the macro cycle for the programming, where you're going to have off season, preseason, and in season. And you're going to rotate it, whatever that is. If it's a 4-month cycle, if it's a 6-month cycle, if it's an 8-month cycle, if it's a 12-month cycle. I don't know what your cycles are. That's something that's on you. And even if you're a weekend warrior and you're not actually competing, you should still do the same thing. Like figure out like what your season is. Me personally, I like the summer season. That's why I want to be optimal for me. But I'm not a competitor, so you have to kind of figure that out, what makes sense for you. So when you're in off season, you want to focus on hypertrophy, meaning that you're trying to build as much muscle as possible because you're not actually doing your sport at a high level at that time. Okay? You're in preseason, meaning that you're prepping to go, let's say, to Worlds or to an actual MMA fight. I don't know, whatever your example is. What you're going to do is you're going to start working on eccentrics and speed strength. So you're going to, like if you notice just recently now, Hamzat is actually going to fight tonight. And I've seen a couple clips of Hamzat training, and you see him training and he's doing a ton of speed strength, because he was prepping for the fight that he's going to do tonight. Now, excuse me. The last one is when you're actually in season. You're maintaining with isometrics and reactive work. Excuse me. So you're doing a lot of isometrics work. This is like wall sits, sitting at the bottom of a squat, holding a whole bunch of load over your head. Things like that in combination with plyometrics. So you have to pick your battles. You have to understand that muscle architecture is how you're built in order for you to be able to function at the highest level. So you have to think of the mindset of like, okay, what am I trying to accomplish? I'm trying to maximize my output, whatever that output is. And you have to look over a long enough time frame to go, okay, how do I want to program this? Am I focusing on hypertrophy? Am I focusing on eccentrics? Am I focusing on isometrics? Those are things that you have to kind of figure out depending on what your schedule is. I can't answer that for you. I can only guide you on what's going to work best for your particular situation. And then you have to sit down and go, okay, this is how I want to build it out. So it really depends on where you're at in the season, on what the objective is in order for you to have the greatest success. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks for watching. As always, comment down below. If you have any questions, concerns, DM me, message me. At the end of the day, I'm here to help you. So hopefully you got something out of this. If not, share this video. See you in the next one.